This week in the world of sports, the NFL fires more coaches. Formula One season quickly approaches. We have to talk about CJ Stroud and so much more. This is the Monday Report, starting now. All right. Hello, everybody. It is Tuesday, January 20th, 2026, and this is the Monday Report on a Tuesday. I'm your host, H. James K., and today we are talking about things, a little bit of college football, a lot of NFL, and a whole bunch of other stuff because the college football roundup is done until September of this year. All right, we're going to talk about the coaching carousel going on in the NFL. Some crazy stuff has been happening. We'll talk about, I want to do kind of a look back on the 2023 NFL quarterback draft class. That's, CJ Stroud, Bryce Young, Anthony Richardson, all of them. Just to, several years on, to kind of reevaluate our thinking at the time. Then we'll talk about we'll have a discussion about the transfer portal and how that is going to be affecting the NFL down the road. We will talk about the college football national championship. We will review how that game turned out yesterday. And then we will talk about Formula One. We'll give you a kind of a quick refresher before testing. Testing happens later this month and in early February. So I'll tell you kind of what's going on. I'll make some early predictions, and then after testing, I will come back and do a more in-depth preview and make some more informed decisions after we see how testing went, because before testing, you're just kind of spitballing in the dark. And after that, we'll get some quick hits, and then we'll get out of here. All right off the top, the NFL coaching carousel has been wild this year. So, legendary Pittsburgh Steelers head coach Mike Tomlin stepped down after 19 seasons. He never had a losing record in a single season. He stepped back after the Steelers got humiliated by the Seahawks last week. That job now remains open. The Baltimore Ravens fired longtime head coach John Harbaugh after the Ravens missed the postseason. On Monday, this one's crazy. The Buffalo Bills fired head coach Sean McDermott after the Buffalo Bills lost their playoff game against the, who'd they play? The Denver Broncos. Yeah, and that game was crazy too. And then, who else is, so earlier in the cycle, the Arizona Cardinals fired Jonathan Gannon. The Cleveland Browns fired Kevin Stefanski. Earlier in the season, like mid-season, the New York Giants fired Brian Daboll. After the season, the Atlanta Falcons fired Raheem Morris. The Miami Dolphins fired Mike McDaniel. And much earlier in the season, the Tennessee Titans fired head coach Brian Callahan. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There's like 9 or 10 openings this year, and it's a ton. I mean, a third of the league is turning over in one season. That's crazy. Already, the New York Giants have hired John Harbaugh to be their new head coach, which I think is a great hire. He's being hired on a 5-year, $100 million contract. And the Atlanta Falcons are hiring Kevin Stefanski. We do not really know the details of his contract yet, but all the same, I think that's a great hire. Here's the thing. Yes, he didn't work out in Cleveland, but it's Cleveland. They're the factory of sadness. They're where dreams of football winning go to die. They've had 40 starting quarterbacks since the turn of the century. So, what can you really say? So, obviously, Pittsburgh, Baltimore, Buffalo, Miami, Arizona, Cleveland, and Tennessee are still open. Let's talk about the candidates that are available realistically. So, those candidates with previous head coaching experience, we've got Sean McDermott, who was just fired by Buffalo. You've got Mike McDaniel, who was just fired by the Miami Dolphins. You've got Cliff Kingsbury, who was the Arizona Cardinals head coach before Jonathan Gannon, who has been the offensive coordinator with the Washington Commanders for the last 2-ish seasons. He's stepping away from that role because he wants to get back into head coaching. You've also got Brian Flores, who was the head coach of the Miami Dolphins, but has been the defensive coordinator of the Minnesota Vikings. You've got Robert Saleh, who was the New York Jets head coach, but he was before then and has after that been the San Francisco 49ers defensive coordinator, which he's got that job right now. And then you got Brian Daboll, who was the head coach of the New York Giants and is now unemployed. On the first-time head coaches, you've got Jesse Minter, the Los Angeles Chargers defensive coordinator, who invariably will get hired this offseason to be a head coach. There's just no way it doesn't happen. You've also got Clint Kubiak, the son of legendary head coach and offensive coordinator Gary Kubiak. Clint Kubiak is currently the offensive coordinator for the Seattle Seahawks. And that offense with Sam Darnold has been booming. JSN, that's Jackson Smith and Jigba, has led the league in receiving yards as a wide receiver. So, he's pretty great. You've also got Grant Udinski. Grant Udinski is the offensive coordinator for the Jacksonville Jaguars. And he's a name that many people don't really know, but what he's been able to do with Trevor Lawrence this year and what he did with Baker Mayfield in the past as a quarterbacks coach, I do believe, have been impressive. And he's a name that's getting tossed around a little bit. And then one last name to know about is Jeff Hafley, who is the defensive coordinator of the Green Bay Packers. Yes, there is talk that he has been getting, and people are kicking the tires on him as well. So, best fits for the remaining job openings. Here I'm going to go through each team and who I think they should hire. So right at the top, Pittsburgh should hire Jesse Minter. Jesse Minter is a modern defensive mind, which continues the defensive head coaches thing going on at Pittsburgh. He's a modern defensive mind. He runs that 4-2-5 amoeba defense, initially pioneered by Wink Martindale and some would say perfected by Mike McDonald and Jesse Minter. I just think he'd bring a modern feel. He's a younger guy. He's got a lot of energy. I think he'd bring a modern feel to Pittsburgh. And with the Pittsburgh ownership being as forgiving as they are, the Rooneys, I think it's the Rooneys. Yeah. They don't fire head coaches. They have never fired a head coach. They didn't fire Tomlin. He resigned. He stepped down. So that would allow a guy like Jesse Minter, a first-time head coach, to come in and kind of find his coaching style and build something real in Pittsburgh without having to worry, oh my God, if I'm not in the playoffs by year 3, I'm going to get fired. For Baltimore, for the Ravens, I think they should hire Sean McDermott. Right now, call him. Call him right now. Do not hesitate. Because I thought it was insane that the Buffalo Bills would fire Sean McDermott after losing in the playoffs. And I mean, yes, Josh Allen is now 0-7 in overtime. And yes, in their best chance to get to the Super Bowl ever, no Patrick Mahomes, no Lamar Jackson, no Joe Burrow, all in the playoffs. Yeah, it was a huge missed opportunity, but I don't think that's Sean McDermott's fault. I thought the GM of the Bills, Brandon Beane, should have been the one who got fired. But instead, he got retained, even though his roster construction was suspect at best. And McDermott got shown the door. Brandon Beane has continually neglected the defense and the wide receiver position on the Buffalo Bills. And sure enough, both of those were kind of an issue in the postseason. Especially the wide receiver position has been an issue for years. So, yeah, I think Sean McDermott's a good coach. He was at Buffalo for 7 years. He helped Josh Allen become the second best quarterback in the league right now. So it's one of those where it was crazy. It was so dumb to fire him. And Baltimore should snatch him up and make him their head coach for the next 6 years. Do it. For Buffalo, I guess I've been hearing scuttlebutt that the players in Buffalo were playing kind of tight, which is a reflection of the head coach. But that being said, you should have retained McDermott, but they didn't. So the two names I'm hearing immediately are current offensive coordinator Joe Brady and the guy and Brady's predecessor Brian Daboll. Personally, I think it should be Brian Daboll because Daboll has been a head coach. He was the one who initially coached up Josh Allen in Buffalo. He's from Buffalo. He lives in Buffalo. He loves the city of Buffalo, New York. I think he's the perfect fit. If you're doing this, which you're doing this, then I think you hire Brian Daboll and you don't look back. For Miami, I like Cliff Kingsbury. He's kind of flashy, kind of wow factor like Miami is, but he's experienced. He's been in the NFL for a while, and I think his offensive scheme can help mask some of the issues with Tua Tagovailoa. Now, that's assuming Tua Tagovailoa is even back. There has been discussion that maybe Miami just cuts him loose because he's so bad. I mean, at this point, Tua Tagovailoa has gotten 2 head coaches fired because Brian Flores did not want Tua at all, and he didn't like Tua, and he was really hard on Tua. And then after that, Miami hired the anti-Brian Flores, which is Mike McDaniel, but he didn't work out with Mike McDaniel either. He kept getting hurt. He kept blaming everyone but himself for his bad play, and then McDaniel got fired. So I think Miami should cut Tua loose, but even if they don't, I like Cliff Kingsbury's ability to mask their faults because, I mean, he was able to do that to an extent with Kyler Murray, and Kyler Murray is even worse. All right, let's talk about the Tennessee Titans. I like Brian Flores. He brings a really physical defense. He brings a hard edge. He has been a head coach before. He's experienced. I think he'd bring a steady, disciplined hand to a franchise that seems to be kind of flailing because the Brian Callahan hire was just such a total disaster. And so I think they should bring Brian Flores in. I know there are some who think he's a bit of a pariah because he did sue the NFL for wrongful termination, and I guess they settled. But he is still a coach in the NFL, and I think they should hire him. Absolutely, he's a great defensive mind. He's ready to be a head coach again, and they should do it before someone else does. All right, let's talk about the Arizona Cardinals. So the Arizona Cardinals, they went 3-14, I think, this year, and they're really bad. And they have some issues. Their offensive roster is pretty other than Marvin Harrison Jr. and like James Conner, their running back. Their quarterback, Kyler Murray, is awful. He's horrible. He's a quarterback who doesn't watch tape, who is too short to play the position in the NFL. I mean, look at it this way. When he got his first big contract, there was talk that the Cardinals wanted to put language in his contract limiting how often he could play Call of Duty instead of look at his playbook because he had so much trouble making himself study. He's just, he's a child. He's not an NFL quarterback. And the sad thing is Jonathan Gannon, who I think was a good guy and a good defensive mind, I mean, he was saddled with a guy who wasn't capable of playing the position. And he got fired because of it. So if Kyler Murray is going to stick around there, which I don't think he should, but he will, I think they should hire Clint Kubiak because what Clint Kubiak has been able to do with Sam Darnold and this offense in Seattle has just been incredible. They were good last year, but they weren't like this. So Arizona should hire Clint Kubiak, and I mean, maybe you cut Kyler Murray loose and you try your hand in the draft, or you try to sign somebody in free agency. But I like Clint Kubiak in Arizona. And lastly, the Cleveland Browns. Oh, the factory of sadness. So here's what I'll say about Cleveland. Nobody in their right mind should want this job. It's like if it was me and my options were be a quarterback's coach or an analyst or be an NFL head coach for Cleveland, I would say I'll stick with being an analyst, thank you. Because here's what's going to happen. You're going to go to Cleveland. You're going to be there for 3 years. You're going to be, it's going to go horribly. And then you're going to get fired and everyone's going to blame you even though it's not your fault and it's ownership's fault. So Cleveland, I think, is going to struggle because Kevin Stefanski was a good coach. It wasn't Kevin Stefanski's fault that they had Deshaun Watson's contract on their books. It wasn't his fault that their ownership traded a whole bunch of draft picks for Deshaun Watson, who was never good when he was healthy and hasn't been healthy most of the time. That wasn't Kevin Stefanski's fault. He won games with Baker Mayfield before the front office and ownership chased Baker Mayfield out the door. He won Coach of the Year with Baker Mayfield. So Stefanski wasn't the problem, but once again, bad ownership, can't take credit, can't take the blame, so they ran him out of town. So I think Grant Udinski, he's a first-year offensive coordinator in Jacksonville. I think he's first year. And it's one of these things where he's not a name who's like sexy, but I don't know who else would take the dang job because you're in salary cap hell. You don't have a quarterback. You're down a significant number of draft picks. The only quarterbacks on your roster are Dylan Gabriel, who's awful, Shadur Sanders, who's incredibly overrated, and Deshaun Watson, who was injured. He tore his Achilles right after tearing his ACL. He came back and immediately tore his Achilles in practice. It was awful. So I think if you're Grant Udinski, you take the job just to get your name out there so that when you invariably get fired, you can get hired at another job. But, you can have the experience, I guess, because I don't know who else is going to take the job, to be honest with you. No one better than, Sean McDermott ain't taking that job. John Harbaugh wouldn't have taken that job. So it is what it is. All right, let's move on and talk about the 2023 NFL draft class. So this draft class had several names, but the big ones were C.J. Stroud, Bryce Young, C.J. Stroud from Ohio State, Bryce Young from Alabama, Anthony Richardson from Florida, Will Levis from, where did he play? Memphis, I think. I think it was Memphis. And then you had Hendon Hooker from Tennessee. And at the time, there were rumors of, there was a serious discussion about Bryce Young versus C.J. Stroud, and many were saying Bryce Young because he'd won a Heisman and national championships, and then the draft process happened, and everyone said, Bryce Young is really short, which is true. And, there was all this talk about how, C.J. Stroud, he failed the S2 cognitive test, which is kind of the modern replacement for the Wonderlic exam that a lot of the quarterbacks take at the combine. And you said, he got like a 20 out of 100 on the S2 cognitive test. Maybe he's just not fast, blah, blah, he's not a quick thinker, blah, blah, blah. And, Bryce Young, he's too small for the position. He'll never make it. And Anthony Richardson, he's raw, but look at all that potential. Look what you can do with him. He's big, he's fast. Yeah, he's not super accurate. And yeah, he's really inexperienced, but he's a lump of clay that you can mold. And, Will Levis, he was an experienced starter, and he's got a huge arm, and he's big, and he's physical, and look what you can do with him. You can mold him into something. And Hendon Hooker, look how accurate he was. Look at his processing at Tennessee. Yeah, he tore his ACL, but this is a dude who ran an explosive offense. And those were all the things. And then, obviously, the Texans, excuse me, the Texans drafted Stroud, and the Panthers drafted Bryce Young, the Colts drafted Anthony Richardson, the Tennessee Titans drafted Will Levis, and the Lions drafted Hendon Hooker in like the 5th round. And now, so many years later, we kind of knew how it played out. So in the rookie year, Bryce Young was abysmal. He was horrible. He was mediocre. He was not a quarterback. Anthony Richardson was not a quarterback. He was a tight end who was throwing the ball. He was horribly inaccurate. He couldn't make decisions. And he got injured early, and he missed almost his entire rookie year. Will Levis was bad. He just turnover prone, couldn't run an offense, horribly susceptible to pressure. He just wasn't a quarterback. And obviously Hendon Hooker had an ACL tear. He didn't play at all. And the Lions have Jared Goff, so there was no chance he was making the field anyway. But C.J. Stroud was really good in his rookie year. He was great, some would say. He was the C.J. Stroud you saw at Ohio State. And then year 2 rolled around. And Stroud was not good. Stroud was actually pretty bad. And Bryce Young was he was so bad earlier in the year that he got benched for Andy Dalton, of all people. And then when he came back, he was okay. He wasn't great, but he was okay. Anthony Richardson in his second year was just bad. there were Colts fans everywhere who were like, oh, but, just, you got to give him starts. He only had 15 starts in college. You got to give him some time to develop. And then he got hurt again. Shocker. And Will Levis, just more of the same. Pressure, sacks, turnovers, picks. And he was just bad in Tennessee. And, they were talking, it was like they got to come up with someone else. And they were playing other QBs. And, they fired their head coach. And then they hired Brian Callahan for his third year or whatever. And then Hendon Hooker in his second year. It became very clear in the 24 season that the Lions did not trust Hendon Hooker to be the backup quarterback. They brought in Teddy Bridgewater off the couch to be the backup because Hendon Hooker just wasn't ready. He wasn't good. And every time the Lions did see Hendon Hooker on the field in the preseason, the offense was bad. It was just bad. So he just didn't... there was no development in his first year. In his first year healthy, so to speak. And then year 3, Stroud, that's this year. Stroud has been bad again. Regressing. He was even worse than he was in his second year. Meanwhile, Bryce Young kind of rounded into form. He wasn't great, but he was a solid QB. Anthony Richardson broke his thumb in the preseason when he didn't see the most obvious blitz pressure in the history of football. Like he's standing in the pocket and there's a corner blitz coming from his right side, right in his line of sight. And the thing is, when you take that snap, you're supposed to throw it right at the receiver who is in the spot where the blitzer vacated. So you're just supposed to take the ball and immediately throw it to the receiver over the blitzer's head. Instead, Anthony Richardson took the ball, looked downfield, totally ignoring the pressure, and he got smacked, and he broke his thumb. Bad. And so he was out several weeks, and that meant Daniel Jones was playing, and Daniel Jones was great. And then in practice, he had one of those like strength bands snap and whack him in the eye, and it broke his orbital bone, which wiped out all of Richardson's season, so he was just done. And Will Levis lost his starting job in Tennessee when the Titans drafted Cam Ward, and he was okay, so Will Levis was demoted to a backup, and the Lions didn't bring Hendon Hooker back in 2025. It's one of those things. It's like, that's what they turned out. So what does that mean looking in the rear view? If it had been me, and I was drafting from those 5 quarterbacks in 23, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I would have gone Bryce Young, Will Levis, C.J. Stroud, Hendon Hooker, then Anthony Richardson. I mean, Will Levis, yes, he's turnover prone and he's kind of bad with pressure, but there were moments of growth along the way. It wasn't great by any means. He was actually pretty horrible. But in my opinion, he was still better than C.J. Stroud because C.J. Stroud he's like a scared, abused puppy right now. My God, that game on Sunday between the Patriots and the Texans, good God Almighty. C.J. Stroud had like 4 picks. He had like 5 fumbles in the game against the Steelers, but it didn't matter because the Steelers' offense, they were just horrible. But he had like 5 fumbles. And then in the next game after that, he had 4 interceptions, and one of them was a pick 6, and he was bad. Pressure's coming. He's deep in his own zone. He throws the ball straight up in the air, and it just lands in the arms of a Patriots player who ran it back like 24 yards for a pick 6. It's just bad. And it's like, even the throws that were completed were not accurate. Stroud went 10 of 26 for 124 yards, 1 touchdown, 4 picks in the first half against the Patriots. That's horrible. That's like bad. So he's getting worse. And the problem is there's no growth. Like Troy Aikman even said, over these several years, we've seen no growth out of C.J. Stroud. If anything, he's regressing, and we all know what that means. What that means is that he's not a franchise QB, and the Houston Texans need to cut him loose. He's on his rookie deal still. They there's no way the Texans can afford to give him a big contract. He's not that guy. He's not a starting QB. He's just not. It's like, yeah, when he's got the best wide receiver core in the history of college football and an all-time O-line, and he played for Ohio State. They're like god-tier rosters every year. So the Texans need to cut him loose. Now, for Bryce Young, it's about time for him to start talking to the Panthers about his new contract. And there's serious talk about, do they give him a new contract at all? Because he's been decent this year, but he's not a $55 million a year quarterback. Like, I would bring him back on a multi-year extension if he was willing to take like $27 million a year every year for 4 years or 3 years. I would be okay with that contract if I was the Panthers. But if he wants like $60 million a year, I'd be like, no, bye-bye. You're not worth it. So the thing, when you look at the other three, none of them are going to get a multi-million-dollar contract. Like, Richardson will be a career third-string quarterback. Same with Will Levis. And Hendon Hooker, hell, I wouldn't be surprised if Hendon Hooker plays in the United Football League in 27 or something, because he's not good. He doesn't develop. He can't read defenses. His motion is just okay. He struggles with accuracy. At the time, we didn't think the 2023 NFL draft QBs were like one of the worst draft classes of all time, but man, when you look at like in contrast to what some of these other draft classes like 21, 22, 24, the 23 class is bad. None of them have been a bona fide star. None of them. At least none of the top guys. None of the top guys, I should say. Because I'm pretty sure Brock Purdy was in the 23 class as Mr. Irrelevant. I'm going to get out my phone and look at that right now. If that's true, then Brock Purdy is the only good quarterback from that entire draft class. No, he was the year before. He was in the 2022 NFL draft class. So what that means is, yeah, the 2023 NFL draft class might be the worst QB class the NFL has seen in like 15 years. Just horrible all around. All right, let's talk about Dante Moore and the transfer portal in college football. So if you didn't hear, Oregon quarterback Dante Moore chose not to go pro. He would have been the number 2 overall player on the board, drafted by the New York Jets, because everyone knows that the Las Vegas Raiders are drafting Fernando Mendoza first overall. That's not a secret. So it was going to be Dante Moore to the Jets, but instead he opted to come back to Oregon for his senior season. Now, there's a multitude of reasons why he did this. So, excuse me. For one, he said he just thought he wasn't ready. And the thing is, I don't blame him, because he wasn't. Because if you look at the game he had against the Indiana Hoosiers in the playoffs, that is what every game against the NFL is going to be like. He looked like a deer in headlights. He was not ready. He wasn't ready for prime time. And that's just that was going to be every week. And then there's also the financial side of this, where he's going to be making like $7 million at Oregon for this final season. And this all ties into a bigger thing that I think we're going to start seeing in the NFL. I truly believe that the NFL is going to see fewer and fewer of these 3-year starters went pro after junior year guys in the draft. I think a lot of these guys who are that guy as a junior are going to be staying to make money, because there is serious money to be made outside of the draft these days. The days of like, oh, I've got to go pro because that's the only way I'm going to make any money. I don't want to keep playing in college and get hurt. No. I'm sorry. If you're one of these big time guys, you can make $1 million. You can make $500,000 in NIL in a year. You can make $5 million if you're a top flight quarterback. So what I think you're going to see is you're going to see a lot more fourth and fifth year guys than third and fourth year guys, which obviously raises the average age of these college football draft classes in the NFL draft, which has a knock-on effect of raising the average age of all rookies. So all of a sudden, the NFL is older than it was. Like J.J. McCarthy came into the league at 21 years old. He was at Michigan for exactly 3 seasons. He was a backup to Cade McNamara in 21, then he was starter, and he went pro. He should have stayed in college. He should have stayed in college. He could have made serious money, and even if he didn't want to stay at Michigan, he could have transferred to LSU or Oregon or anywhere else and made serious money as a fourth-year guy and then gone pro a little older, a little more developed. And I think you're going to see a lot more of that going forward. Just, there's no incentive for the superstars of college football to jump to the pros after junior year when you could be making serious money through the portal and NIL. So we're going to start seeing this. Like quarterbacks, don't be surprised if quarterbacks entering the league at 20 or 21 years old, if that just doesn't happen anymore. If it's like, yeah, he's 22, 23, 24 years old, that wouldn't surprise me at all. And as you're seeing with Indiana, more experienced rosters are more successful rosters. So it's one of these things where they're all going to feed into this whole thing where everyone's just going to get older. People are going to stay in college longer, make more money in college longer, and then be older when they get to the league. And that will have knock-on effects on the longevity of NFL players. Because if you spend 5 years at the college level and you play a significant chunk of games, if you play like 13 or 14 games every year for 4 years, plus you play 9 games, from your redshirt year, because there's talk that they might change the redshirt rules from 4 games, then you can redshirt, to 9 games, then you can redshirt. If they actually go along with that, you could be seeing some people playing like 50, 60 games, I mean, think about what that will do to the to these top line NFL rookies. If if you did 14 games every year for 5 years, that's 70 games. I mean, you're going to see more of that in college football. I truly believe. So that'll be something that we need to talk about. We need to keep an eye on that down the road. So last night there was a college football game. The College Football National Championship game took place last night between the Indiana Hoosiers and the Miami Hurricanes in Miami Gardens at Hard Rock Stadium. And man, oh man, what a game. That was really something, wasn't it? That game, I predicted that game was going to be like 32-16 Indiana win. I thought it would be way more lopsided than it was, but credit to that Miami team. They got some heart. That was a good team. It's late as I'm recording this. It's 12:30 as I'm recording this segment of the podcast. And man, oh man, a lot happened in that game. There was a lot going on, and it's just, it was so good. I'm so happy for Indiana. Just right off the top. All right, get serious. So Fernando Mendoza finished the game 16 of 27 for 186 yards. He had 7 carries for -8 yards with a rushing touchdown, and that rushing touchdown was a gutsy 12-yard rushing touchdown on 4th down late in the game to give Indiana a 24-14 lead with 11 minutes to go in the 11 minutes to go in the fourth quarter, I think. On the Indiana side, Omar Cooper Jr. had 5 catches for 71 yards. Charlie Becker had 4 catches for an extremely clutch 65 yards. On the Miami side, Carson Beck had 19 completions for 32 attempts, 232 yards, 1 touchdown, and 1 back-breaking interception. Mark Fletcher had 17 carries for 112 tough yards, and those were some tough yards, for 2 touchdowns. Malachi Tony had 10 catches for 122 yards and a touchdown. So, circling back to Indiana now that the highlights are on the way, Miami made it really hard on Indiana. So, Indiana's offense never really got into like a serious flow. They had a couple of drives that like got going. Like they had like a couple of 14 play drives and that. But then there were a lot of drives that were just, spurts and stops and starts, and they had a lot of 3 and outs and everything, but there were a couple of drives, 14 plays here, 14 plays there, that really kind of allowed them to stay ahead in the game. Because Miami, it was 10-0 at halftime. But by the end of the third quarter, it was clear that Miami's offense had finally arrived. The Miami offense outgained the Hoosiers like 294 to like 63 in like the third quarter or some crazy shit like that. Pardon my language. It was one of those where it was clear that the Miami offense was really had arrived. They weren't gonna be laying down anymore. So the Indiana offense, who had no success blocking Ruben Bain and all of their pass rushers, all of their crazy defenders, Akeem Ezador and all of those guys. That Miami defense is so physical. They played such a good defensive game. Their pass rush was nasty. Their pass defense was just smothering. And for a guy like Fernando Mendoza, it was pretty nuts. So last week when I was laying out my key players, I said for Indiana it was Fernando Mendoza and Aiden Fisher. And Mendoza, he was great. He didn't have the flashiest game. He only had like 186 yards. He had no touchdowns passing. But there was one thing he did that was key. He didn't turn the ball over. He got sacked several times and he was running for his life the whole day, but he never turned the ball over. And when the chips were down, when it was clear that Indiana was going to need something now, like for God and country, this is the moment, he ran in that 12-yard touchdown drive, which was incredible, absolutely incredible. And on the defensive side, Aiden Fisher, I said last week that if Aiden Fisher had a good game, then Indiana would win, and he did. He was so good. A little drink of ice water for my throat. I've been hooping and hollering for the last 4 hours, so my voice isn't great. But Aiden Fisher, he's so good at linebacker. He's just so good. He was really good in pass rush. He was playing really downhill in the run game. But there were some really key things where it's like, oh, you can see that he's the one taking that route away, or he's the one harassing the quarterback. And it was evident from Carson Beck that Aiden Fisher was a serious factor in the defense. He was just everywhere. And that's what you needed. Now, for Miami, I said the key players were obviously Carson Beck and Malachi Tony. So for Carson Beck, he had to be perfect, and he wasn't. He had to be efficient. He had to, not turn the ball over, not get sacked a lot. He didn't get sacked a lot, if at all. I can't remember if he did get sacked or not. He threw out of a sack. I remember that, he threw a ball out of a sack. But the one thing he did do wrong was he turned the ball over. And he turned the ball over at the worst time, right at the end. In Miami is driving down, they're trying to get a game-winning drive, and he just chucked it downfield, and whether he threw the ball wrong or the receiver ran the wrong route, it was intercepted. It was intercepted and down on like the 4-yard line, and that was the game. Game over. 44 seconds left in the game, no timeouts, Indiana wins 27-21. Yeah, I can't believe how unprofessional. I forgot to mention that Indiana won the game 27-21. Good goodness. It's been a long day. But my keys to the game last week were can Miami limit Indiana's possessions while taking advantage of their own? So I'm going to give this one a yes and a no. Can Miami limit Indiana's possessions? Yes. They did that. They absolutely did that. They did not let Indiana just like do whatever they wanted. So from that perspective, you get credit. Ding, check mark. While taking advantage of their own, they did not do that. At least they didn't do that in the first half. There were some serious opportunities in the second half where they could have done something and they just couldn't. They had like 19 yards of offense in the first quarter. They ran like 15 plays in the first 2 quarters or whatever. It was in the first quarter and a half. I mean, it was just they couldn't do anything. So it's one of these things where the defense held up their end of the bargain largely, but the offense just was. They were missing in action for a long time, and they allowed Indiana to kind of establish a little bit of a cushion. It wasn't a lot. I mean, I thought this game would be like no doubt by halftime, but the game, Indiana had enough of a cushion where they could afford to make mistakes. They didn't make mistakes, really, but they could have afforded to make a couple of mistakes here and there because Miami just could not claw all the way out. They could get within 3. They got within 3 points several times, but at the end of the day, they could not get to the top of the mountain. They couldn't claw their way out of the hole. Yeah, and my other key to the game was, can Beck play an efficient, clean game? And the answer is no. He threw a back-breaking interception at the worst possible time. He wasn't super efficient. I mean, he completed like just over 50% of his throws. He had a horrible interception. It wasn't the efficient, like, I would have rather seen him, do like 17 of 21 for 86 yards and no interception and they win the game versus this like 232 yards but with an interception. It's one of these things where him turning the ball over, it did cost them the game literally because they lost, but it was a symptom of a much bigger problem, which was the fact that until deep into the game, Miami just couldn't push the ball downfield. They couldn't do it until like halfway through the third quarter. In the entire first half, it was like he was playing with 2 eye patches. Just, I don't know, I can't see anything. I don't know what's going on. So, it's one of these things where he needed to be perfect. I made the analogy last week that Indiana was like a machine gun. They got 20 bullets in the magazine. And Miami was a 6-shot revolver. They got 6 shots, and that's all they got. There's no help. There is no extra ammunition. If they don't make it count with those 6 shots, they're out of bullets, and it's done. Indiana, they used about 15 bullets to get rid of Miami. And Miami used all 6, and it didn't, that was it. They fired all their shots, and it's over. Sorry, try again next year. All right, so my thoughts. Indiana is the greatest story in the history of college football. They're the first team to go 16-0 in the modern era. The only other team to ever do it is Yale in 1894. Indiana had their first Heisman Trophy. This was their first Big Ten championship since 1967, and it was their first national championship ever for Indiana. Get a load of this one. Indiana did not trail in the playoffs. If they got a lead, it was a wrap. Think about it. Once they got a lead, the game was over. You could just pack up and go home. It was done. They got a lead. Oh, it's done. And another one that I heard, this was Miami's first loss against an AP-ranked team this season. They went 7-1. So, Indiana earned it. It wasn't like they played Tulane or something. They played a good team who fought like hell to pull out a win. My final thoughts on the whole season. This was the best playoffs ever. Period. Most exciting, great moments. A lot of teams coming out of nowhere. Like, if you had told me in the beginning of the year that the teams to watch would have been Ole Miss, Miami, and Indiana, I'd been like, you're out of your mind. Yeah, they're going to be good, but there's no way those are the 3 teams that are really going to make a lot of noise. But they were. Those were the 3 teams that were the real storylines in this year's playoff. Excuse me. But what a great way to end a season. I've already ordered an Indiana Hoosiers national championship shirt. I go to Indianapolis so much that it's almost like the state of Indiana is my second home. So I figured I got to get a shirt. So I got an Indiana shirt coming in the mail. Cost me a pretty penny. Goodness, t-shirts are so expensive now. But yeah, this was great. This was great. What else do I want to say before we kind of put an accent, put a period on this season? NIL has allowed college football to become something great. Something that I don't think it was possible for it to be. The NIL has kind of gotten rid of the entrenched hierarchies in the game where it was like you either played down south or you were Ohio State, or you got lucky once every 40 years. And that was just the way it was. Michigan won their championship in that era where it was like you were either Ohio State or you were a team down south. Or you got lucky for the first time in 50 years or whatever. But now, if you get the right guy and the right players, any team can do it. Any team. You get the right combination of players and coaches, and it's possible. No one can tell you it's not possible. The Indiana Hoosiers won a national championship. Not Ole Miss, not Georgia, not Clemson, Indiana. So that's a product of NIL and the transfer portal. Those two things have made a story like this possible, and I freaking love it. I cannot wait for the 2026 season. It's going to be great. All right, let's talk about Formula One. So, as I said in the beginning, this is going to be kind of a quick teaser, refresher before testing, because they've already had a secret, private, behind closed doors test early in January. Then they're going to have another one in late January, and then there's another one on like the 10th and 11th of February in, I think, Australia. The second test is in like Bahrain. And the third test is in like Australia, I think. They used to do testing in Spain, but they don't do that anymore. Either way, so we're going to talk about new teams, new rules, changes in driver and team lineups, and then I'll give you my predictions for like top 3 drivers, top 3 constructors, and I'll give you some bold predictions, and then, we'll move on. All right. Right off the top, there's an 11th team in Formula One this year. There is an 11th team. Auto manufacturer Cadillac is joining as a full works team. Now, they're not going to be a works team yet. They don't make their own engine yet. Their own engine, they're working on it. Their engine, right now, they're going to be powered by Ferrari engines, and they will be powered by Cadillac motors starting in like 2028, 2029. But right now, they are building their own car at their factory in Fishers, Indiana. Now, for IndyCar fans, that Fishers, Indiana facility should be obvious. That's where Michael Andretti was building the new Andretti Global factory to replace their headquarters in Speedway. And then after Michael Andretti lost a whole bunch of money to an AI startup and had to sell Andretti Global to TWG, that's Dan Tauris, who owns the Cadillac Formula One team, the Fishers facility was finished, and that's where both the Andretti Global IndyCar team and the Cadillac Formula One team operate out of. That's the main headquarters. In addition, there will be additional development for the Formula One engines done at the GM facility in Concord, North Carolina. There will be further aero and chassis work done at the Cadillac F1 team's facility at the Silverstone circuit in England. It's one of these things where there's a lot of moving pieces, and they've had kind of a short runway because they've only been like given the full green light for a year, so they didn't really have a big head start. But Cadillac is on the grid. They're an American team headquartered in America, run by a lot of Americans. Unlike Haas, who technically is headquartered in North Carolina, but their real headquarters is in Italy, right next door to the Ferrari Formula One team. All right, on top of new teams, there's also new rules. This year is a total overhaul of the Formula One formula. So they're going away from DRS, as we know it. That's, the opening and closing rear wing. Instead, the front and rear wings will move in unison. flattening out to reduce drag on certain straights. This is done to increase the straight line speed of the Formula One cars, and we'll get to that reason in a second. But so what's basically the way it works now is like the rear wing is DRS like normal. Like it's the same setup. It's not called DRS, but it's the same. Like there's the actuator on the main plane that moves the upper elements up and down, up and down, up and down. That doesn't change. What does change is you're putting a similar actuator, either one in the center of the front wing on the main plane, or two where you're putting one on either side. Like if you were to cut the front wing into quarters, you're putting it like between the first and second quarter and the third and the fourth quarter. That's where the actuators would go on the wings. You can do either or. Like I know Racing Bulls or Visa Cash App RB or whatever they are called this year, they have the two actuators. But their sister team, the parent team Red Bull, does the one actuator under the nose on the front main plane of the wing. The Cadillac Formula One car has the same single actuator. I'm pretty sure the Haas team has the single actuator. It is open for interpretation. You could do either or. So on top of the new opening closing kind of wings, the wing end plates are kind of set in stone. Like you can have like 3 elements, and those elements can only do certain things. Further back in the car, they've brought back, it's not called a barge board anymore. They're calling it like the in-washing panel, where there's this thing that's going to catch the wake coming off the front tires and direct it towards the side pods. Now, the teams are allowed 3 elements on this like in-washing panel. And a lot of those teams are probably going to try to turn it into an outwashing panel, because you want to outwash the dirty air away from the car, not in towards the car and the floor. But Formula One is trying to make in-washing, that way there's less dirty air behind the car, even at the sacrifice of having a little bit more drag. Further on in the car, they've gotten rid of the super cool sculpted underbody elements that were like for the ground effect era that this previous rule set was. I personally love that. I've been saying that ground effect was a necessity for years, but excuse me, I had to take a drink. But drivers were complaining of porpoising. So what basically happened is the teams, with ground effect, you want to run the car as low as possible, and you want to run the car as stiff as possible. Now, the problem is when you run that much underbody downforce, you can have a phenomenon called porpoising, where like the downforce generated by the wing, the underbody pulls the car low to the ground, which stalls like the rear section of the underbody elements, which raises them back up until they start generating downforce. Then they go back down, and then they raise them back up. And now that doesn't happen like over 30 seconds. That'll happen like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, down a straight, like boom, 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 boom. And it's really rough on a driver's back. Now, in the original ground effect era back in the 80s, some teams would have a little like sensor of some kind of analog sensor in the car, that if the downforce got too great, it would open a panel on the underside of the underbody that would spoil the underbody wing shape a little bit to get to, kind of level off the downforce to prevent porpoising. But the reason this whole porpoising thing happens is because if you don't efficiently craft the underbody wing shape, you can be more susceptible to the harmonics that create this cyclical porpoising, yes downforce, no downforce, yes downforce, no downforce kind of routine. And certain cars were really bad at this. Like in the wind tunnel, cars have to run higher ride heights. So Mercedes designed a car that had like 0 side pods, and the whole thing was size 0, downforce generation only. And then when they actually got to the track and they could run it at the actual ride heights that they wanted, the car porpoised violently because it created so much downforce under the car that it just bounced and bounced and bounced and bounced and porpoised and porpoised and porpoised. and it was brutal. So Mercedes was having to drive the car at higher ride heights, which is obviously a disadvantage because there's more drag, there's less downforce, it's less efficient. And other teams had struggled with porpoising to a lesser extent, so Formula One raised the ride height, which kind of defeats the purpose of the ground effects, because by raising the ride height, you created more outwashing, which created more dirty air, which made it harder to pass, which kind of defeated the whole purpose of going to ground effect in the first place. So in that effect, instead of just saying, deal with it, figure it out, Formula One kind of defeated the whole purpose of going to ground effect in the first place. So, and instead of going to like active suspension, which would actively, nullify the porpoising, they're just getting rid of the sculpted underbodies altogether. They're not getting rid of them completely. They're not going back to like the flat underbody, but it's dramatically less like aggressive than it was. It's much more tame. Other than the aerodynamic changes, the cars have removed the MGU-H. So the MGU-H is the motor generator unit heat. And this was part of the hybrid system where basically it was attached to the turbo, and it would take excess heat off of the turbo to generate electricity to charge the batteries. Now, the problem was it's incredibly complicated, it's horrifically expensive to develop and to maintain, and from a fan perspective, it made the cars sound awful. So, if you look at cars in 2025 and that kind of dead-end, kind of droning sound, that was because of the MGU-H. The MGU-K, which is the kinetic motor generator unit, is still around. That's on the brakes to take brake rotor heat during braking and turn that into electricity. So that's currently the only way to do it. But by getting rid of the MGU-H, it made the engine significantly cheaper. Now, that's the same engines, really. Same size. There was a change where they decided that at ambient temperature, the compression ratio can be no higher than 16:1, which, I mean, for those who don't know, 16:1 compression ratio is freaking crazy. That's insane. Insane rocket science, alien technology kind of compression ratios. Like, a lot of cars will have less than 10:1. Hell, a lot of them will have less than 6:1, that kind of thing. So, the problem is, it used to be they would run 18:1 compression ratios. So, what's happened, though, is because the rule says at ambient temperature, teams like Red Bull, who is making their own power units with Red Bull powertrains now, and Mercedes have discovered that they can create an engine that, when it's warmed up and running, has an 18:1 compression ratio, but once it cools down at ambient temperature, it has a 16:1 compression ratio, which would be worth a couple of tenths per second and a not insignificant amount of horsepower if they can get it to work. Now, from what we know, I forgot to mention something. We have a new other than Cadillac, there's another new manufacturer, Audi. Audi took over the Sauber team. So there's a Works Audi team who either is developing their own engine for 26 or will be developing one for 28. Either way, but regardless, teams like Audi, Ferrari, Cadillac, Aston Martin, who another one I forgot. Forgive me, I'm out of practice when talking about motorsports. It's been a minute. Honda has officially come back into Formula One as a pseudo-works engine deal with Aston Martin. So like Honda, Audi, Ferrari have all reportedly have not discovered this compression ratio trick. So if it's a sizable advantage, then obviously Mercedes and Red Bull will be very, very ahead, and the rules will have to do something. But it is definitely a rule change. Now, a lot of these changes are in pursuit of a 50-50 split between the power generated by the hybrid unit and the engine power. In reality, the split is more like 55-45 in favor of the engine. Now, what this means is that the engine gives off about 570 horsepower, and then the hybrid gives you everything else to get them to 1,000 horsepower. That's about the long and the long and short of it. But here's the problem. In like IMSA and in WEC, to get a similar split for power, they would have hybrid generation on the front and the rear. In Formula One, they only have it on the rear. Now, you might be asking, but why? If it's more efficient to do it on the front and the rear, then why wouldn't you have, front generation and front deployment like in WEC? And the reason is because Mercedes didn't want it. Mercedes said that if they allow Audi to come in and have like front hybrid generation and all that, like in the World Endurance Championship, they'd have a huge advantage. So all the Formula One teams said no. So this creates a problem though, because there's no kinetic energy generation system in the world that is efficient enough to generate the power required to give the teams enough energy at all times to be aggressive. So what this means is there is serious talk that for these cars, they might run out of battery on these long straightaways halfway down the straightaway and then have to lift and coast and drag teams to generate power and harvest instead of being aggressive and trying to pass. So there's serious talk that this 50-50 split might lead to really boring racing, where instead of teams having to being aggressive and charging forward, they're having to just stay in a line and generate electricity to recharge their batteries. Now, some teams say that this isn't going to be as dramatic, but the fact that they're not allowed to generate the electricity with the front wheels and the rear wheels means that these engines will be energy starved, and it will be a whole thing. That is something to keep an eye on. Lighter cars. The cars are going to be 30 kilograms lighter than they were, which is somewhere around what would that be? That would be 60-something, 70-something pounds lighter, which isn't a ton, but it's not insignificant. And the cars are going to be slightly smaller in length and width. To kind of, because the cars have gotten too big, and everyone knows that the cars have gotten too big. But with the hybrid systems, you can't make the cars like 2005 dimensions. You have to make them bigger. So it'll be interesting to see how the lighter, smaller cars affects the show, so to speak, affects the racing. I'm not super enthused about this rule set. I think it's going to be kind of boring. But, this is what it's going to be. Now, the thing is, I'm probably going to have to get Apple TV because Formula One is on Apple TV in America now. The days of it being on ESPN are done. So if I want to watch Formula One, I have to get Apple TV. And, I'll probably just end up buying the cheapest option because there's nothing else I would really, other than there's that Monarch Godzilla show. But it's so dumb that Formula One, chased the almighty dollar. So they took more money to go on Apple TV than instead of choosing availability by being on ESPN. And the thing is, they're going to see significantly fewer viewers because a lot of people just don't have Apple TV, or they'll stream it illegally online, on Stream East or whatever. But it is definitely something to keep in mind that Formula One will be on Apple TV in 2026. All right, let's talk about some lineup changes. So at Red Bull has let go of Yuki Tsunoda, who himself was replacing Liam Lawson last year. They've promoted Isaac Hadjar. Isaac Hadjar raced for Racing Bulls last year, Visa Cash App RB. And he's going into the second seat. Sadly, I don't have a lot of faith in his results in that seat because it seems that every driver that Red Bull has put in the second seat along with Verstappen has had their career collapse and is out. Yuki Tsunoda was having pretty decent results with RB, and then he got to the Red Bull seat, and that's all she wrote. He was gone. Bye-bye. But we'll see. Good luck, Isaac Hadjar. I hope you enjoy your remaining season in Formula One because you're probably not going to be there in 27. Moving on to Racing Bulls with Isaac Hadjar graduating, so to speak, to race to Red Bull. Liam Lawson has been retained in the first seat, but they are choosing to elevate Arvid Lindblad from Formula 2. He's one of the Red Bull development drivers. He's been driving a couple of years in Formula 2, and he's had a couple of free practice 1 sessions in Formula 1 over the last year. Arvid Lindblad. At Aston Martin, not only is Honda joining as like a works engine kind of thing, they finally cut full ties with Red Bull and have gone to making their own thing. Adrian Newey has left Red Bull and is joining Honda as their team principal, which is huge, I think, for Aston Martin. Now, if those two things really stick the landing with this rule set, there's every possibility that Aston Martin could be a serious contender. We'll see. They certainly spend like one. Cadillac has hired Valtteri Bottas and Sergio Perez to fill the 21st and 22nd cars on the grid. It's going to be weird. There's going to be 22 cars in Formula 1 this year. But yeah, and this is a smart move. So, for those who don't know, IndyCar driver Colton Herta has left IndyCar and has gone to Formula 2 to get the super license points required to drive in Formula 1. Because Cadillac wants him in Formula 1 badly, badly, badly. So, in the interim, they've hired old, experienced Valtteri Bottas and Sergio Perez to help develop the car, because trying to develop a brand new car on a brand new team with a rookie driver would be crazy. That'd be insane. All right, let's get to some early predictions then. These predictions are just vibes. There's no data to back these up. I haven't seen any practice. I haven't seen any testing. All we know is what we're hearing rumors-wise and what we think might happen based off of last year. Now, with that said, before testing, my top 3, I'm predicting that in third place, I'm predicting Lando Norris with McLaren to finish third, George Russell with Mercedes to finish second, and Oscar Piastri of McLaren to finish first in the drivers. Now, the main thinking is, if with all the rumors of the performance gains of the Mercedes engine, McLaren is a Mercedes customer team, and they were much better than Mercedes in 2025. So if that pattern holds, then they should be faster than the team that makes their engines. Now, from the Constructors' Championship, I'm predicting that Red Bull will finish third in the Constructors, McLaren will finish second in the Constructors, and Mercedes will finish first. Now, what this might honestly mean is that George Russell and Andrea Kimi Antonelli are like second, third, fourth, fifth, every single race, but they don't win a lot. And you have like Oscar Piastri and Lando, just winning more races, or however that ends up working, where like, because we've had a split championship like 2024. Red Bull won the constructors, but McLaren won the drivers. So, no, flip that. Verstappen won the drivers, but McLaren won the constructors because they were just more consistent. So maybe Oscar Piastri has a really dominant year, but Mercedes is just 2-3, 2-3, 2-3, 2-3, and it allows them to build up a lot of constructors points, even though they're not technically leading the points championship for the drivers' championship. All right, moving on to let's do 3 bold predictions for Formula 1. So these are just vibes. I don't know. I'm just going with my gut. So first of all, Cadillac won't be the 11th team in points. Obviously, there are 11 teams on the grid now. Cadillac will not be the 11th team on the grid. I think they'll be 10th. Truthfully, if you put a gun to my head and said, okay, then who is going to be 11th, I'd probably pick Alpine, because Alpine is horribly dysfunctional. I don't like their drivers lineup. Flavio Briatore has created a really toxic environment in that team. They've lost tons of team principals and staff, and it's just chaos. Alpine has stopped making engines. Renault engines are no more. They're now a Mercedes customer team. And I know you'd be thinking, but Mercedes might have the best engine. Blah, blah, blah. Yeah, but I think the Alpine car might just be that bad. to be honest with you. It wouldn't surprise me if you had Valtteri Bottas or Sergio Perez had like a freak 7th place finish and got a whole bunch of points, and Alpine scored 1 point on the whole year or didn't score any at all. And maybe Cadillac will just go scoreless the whole year, but I have this weird feeling that they're not going to be the worst team. They're going to be the second worst team by a healthy margin, but they won't be the worst of the worst. I think that'll be a distinction that goes to Alpine. A second bold prediction. Red Bull will struggle to get third in the Constructors. I think they're going to be locked in a titanic death match against Ferrari. In the end, I think Max Verstappen being a better driver than Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton right now will be what gets Red Bull the third place in the Constructors. But yeah, and to kind of follow along on this, I have no faith in Lewis Hamilton's ability to perform well at Ferrari. Father Time has caught up to him. The team isn't a cultural fit to his body of work. It just wouldn't surprise me at all if he underperforms for a second year in a row. And then my third prediction, Ferrari will win more races than Red Bull. I have a feeling that Max Verstappen is going to be deadlocked between 4th and 6th place every single week. It'll be enough to get him to help Red Bull get third in the Constructors, but he'll never win. I don't think he'll win a single race this year. And if he does, it'll be like 2 or 1 races, 1 or 2 wins. I think Ferrari, Charles Leclerc will have probably 4 wins or 3 wins, but Max will have 2, even though he technically outpointed both Hamilton and Charles Leclerc. Okay, let's get some quick hits now to wrap this thing up. LeBron James' streak of 21 straight All-Star Game starter nods will end this season, as he wasn't voted a starter for this year's All-Star Game in the NBA. I didn't know he had a streak of that. That's crazy to me, to be honest with you. The Detroit Lions have hired former Arizona Cardinals offensive coordinator Drew Petzing to be their new offensive coordinator. This is kind of an uninspiring hire. A lot of Lions fans wanted Mike McDaniel. But that, the Lions signed Drew Petzing. The reasoning I'm hearing is that he runs a very run-heavy offense, and when he didn't have Jacoby Brissett at quarterback, they were pretty good at throwing the ball. So, maybe. Now, if this doesn't work out, then what this means is that Dan Campbell cannot hire offensive coordinators. Because Anthony Lynn, his first one was bad. He fired him midseason, took over. Then he did an internal promotion of Ben Johnson, who was hired by Matt Patricia to be like the tight ends coach or to be an analyst or whatever, and then Dan Campbell elevated him to be the offensive coordinator, and obviously Ben Johnson is now with the Bears. And then the third offensive coordinator pick, Johnny Morton, he lasted about 5 games, then he was fired because the offense was just horrible. So, yeah, we'll see. It's a pick. It's certainly a signing. It's one of the hires of all time. All right, and then lastly, the SEC and the Big Ten continue to be at an impasse over the future format of the college football playoff. The SEC wants a 16-team, while the Big Ten still pushes for a 24-team playoff of some fashion. Now, apparently there is considerable consensus among the ACC, Big 12, and the SEC over 16, but I guess the Big Ten wants 24 with more guaranteed spots per conference. So this was technically supposed to be decided on December 1st of 2025, and then the deadline was moved to the 13th or the 16th of January, and that deadline has now come and gone. So it's looking like the 2026 format's going to be what it is right now, and the earliest that we're going to get any changes is probably going to be, 27, 28 maybe. It's ugly, but once they figure out an actual format, maybe they can start focusing on fixing everything else that's wrong with this sport. One more thing before we get out of here. Since I started recording this episode earlier on Monday, the Miami Dolphins have hired Jeff Hafley, and the Tennessee Titans have hired Robert Saleh. So earlier in the episode, you will have seen I said, yeah, Miami should have hired Cliff Kingsbury, and Tennessee should have hired Brian Flores. Well, shows you what I know sometimes. Yeah, Miami went with Packers defensive coordinator Jeff Hafley. I think that's a really good hire for Miami. It's very different culturally. It's much more of a serious coach, and he's obviously defensive minded. So it'll be interesting to see what he does for his offensive staff. Same with the Tennessee Titans. Robert Saleh. Now, his tenure with the Jets was chaotic, and we have no idea if that was a product of the Jets organization or if that was just his skills as a head coach. So we'll see what he does with the development of Cam Ward, their young quarterback. But, his teams always play nasty defense. His defenses are always great. So look for Tennessee to have a really good defense. I don't really know what Miami is going to be under Jeff Hafley. I mean, he's a first-time head coach, so it'll be kind of interesting to see what that looks like. But wait and see, I guess. Wait to see what those two teams do with the draft. All right. So for those of you listening on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, and everywhere else that podcasts are available, thank you. Please consider liking, subscribing, spreading the word, and all of that. For those of you watching on YouTube, thank you. Like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell icon to get notifications so you can catch every new episode. My name is H. James K. Thank you all for tuning in. Until next time.